Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak Europe podcast, available every morning on Apple, Spotify or wherever you listen. It's Wednesday, the 5th of February in London. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Coming up today, Donald Trump says the United States should take control of the Gaza Strip and rebuild it into a new Riviera.
Stormy weather brewing. Alphabet's cloud sales fall short of expectations as the firm's AI spending drives concerns.
Plus, how the slump in demand for diamonds has caused a crisis at De Beers.
Let's start with a roundup of our top stories.
Donald Trump says the United States should take control of the devastated Gaza Strip, sparking rebukes and ridicule from allies and adversaries. Speaking during a White House news conference alongside Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Trump suggests deploying US troops to secure the area and assuming responsibility for reconstruction.
We have an opportunity to do something that could be phenomenal. And I don't want to be cute, I don't want to be a wise guy, but the Riviera of the Middle East, this could be something that could be so bad, this could be so magnificent.
While not directly endorsing Trump's proposal, Netanyahu didn't offer any opposition during the press conference. Last week, Trump suggested he'd like to see the Gaza Strip cleared out as part of a post-war operation. Much of the territory is in ruins after Israel's 15-month war with Hamas, following the group's October 7th attack on the country.
President Trump's intervention comes as Israel and Hamas continue to exchange prisoners and hostages as part of a 6-week ceasefire. Reacting to the US president's Gaza proposal, the former NATO Supreme Allied Commander in Europe, Wesley Clark, warned that it would be exceptionally challenging to deliver.
There are huge problems at the bottom, not to mention strategic consent at the top. So, look, he's the president of the United States. Better listen to him. But I've done these things. I can tell you how difficult this is. This is unimaginably difficult.
Wesley Clark spoke as Saudi Arabia reiterated its support for a Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital and rejected, quote, any infringement on the legitimate rights of the Palestinian people. US Senator Chris Van Hollen, a Democrat on the Foreign Relations Committee, was more blunt, calling Trump's proposal, quote, ethnic cleansing by another name.
The US Postal Service has temporarily suspended the acceptance of inbound international parcels from China and Hong Kong. According to its website, the flow of letters from China and Hong Kong will not be impacted. The move comes after President Trump imposed a 10% tariff increase on Chinese goods. The suspension of inbound parcels from Hong Kong and mainland China by US Postal Service has led to a drop in Chinese e-commerce stocks.
A former Google software engineer is facing new US charges related to stealing technology to boost China's AI industry. Chinese national Lin Wei-ding, who was first indicted in March, now faces 7 counts of economic espionage, along with counts of theft of trade secrets. US prosecutors allege that he stole chip technology used by Google to train its AI models, such as Gemini. Lin Wei-ding pleaded not guilty to the original charges in March.
Swedish police say at least 11 people have been killed in what has been described as the country's worst mass shooting. The incident happened at an adult education centre in a city 200 kilometres west of Stockholm yesterday. Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson has responded to the attack.
Darkness is being cast over Sweden tonight. It is with bottomless sadness that we have received the news from the police that about 10 people have been killed and several have been injured in a school shooting in Örebro.
Flera har skadats.
Swedish Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson speaking there through a translator. Authorities say they do not know the perpetrator's motive, but do not believe it is terrorism.
Now, let's talk about some earnings reports out this morning. The Spanish lender Santander is committing to spending 10 billion euros in buybacks over the course of 2025 and 2026. The lender reported net income for the fourth quarter that beat the average analyst estimate. The bank says that it is targeting about 62 billion euros in revenue for this year.
Alphabet's earnings missed expectations during the last 3 months of 2024 after sales from its cloud business slowed. The Google parent reported revenue of $81.6 billion over the period, which was lower than the analysts' forecast. The firm also announced higher than expected capital expenditure. CEO Sundar Pichai says their AI offerings can rival industry competition.
There's been a lot of observations on DeepSeek. First of all, I think tremendous team. I think they've done very, very good work. I would say both are 2.0 flash models or 2.0 flash thinking models. They are some of the most efficient models out there, including comparing to DeepSeek's.
Alphabet CEO Sundar Pichai speaking there. The company's shares fell by more than 9% in after-hours trading and have gained 9% so far this year.
Now, France's Prime Minister is expected to survive 2 no-confidence votes today, allowing him to implement a delayed 2025 budget. Francois Bayrou used a special constitutional provision to push the bill through Parliament without a vote, triggering ballots that could force his resignation. But motions are likely doomed to fail due to the Socialists' decision to abstain from the vote. Bayrou remains vulnerable, though, to future no-confidence votes as he lacks an overall majority, with the Socialists already planning to file another vote after the budget is adopted.
And the Nikkei in Japan is reporting that Nissan is leading towards abandoning plans to combine with Honda. The pair had been negotiating the terms of a deal in which Honda would offer Nissan a lifeline by absorbing its struggling rival and bringing the two brands together under a single holding company. But media reports said that friction has emerged between the two this week. A termination of talks would bring what could have been a historic deal for Japan's auto industry to a swift end. Nissan's shares suspended from trading in Tokyo after slumping by almost 5%. Honda shares up about 9.4% on that reporting from the Nikkei.
Now, let's get to the markets this hour after our top stories. So the MSCI Asia Pacific Index up by 0.5%. China's markets reopening after Lunar New Year holidays with the reality of a trade war skirmish between the US and China. Mainland Chinese equities are down. The CSI 300 down by 0.7%. Also, you had a slump in e-commerce stocks, particularly in Hong Kong because of that US Postal Service story. Alphabet and AMD tumbled after their earnings disappointed yesterday. US and European stock futures this morning are also in the red, down 0.5% for the US stocks 50 futures. And you've also got this signal from the front end of the Treasuries that maybe the Fed might abandon actually loosening policy by the end of this year, this amidst all of the Trump policies. We've also had gold hitting a fresh record high this morning. 2,857 is where we trade on bullion right now. Those are the markets.
In a moment, we'll bring you more on the US trade tariff story and how China's reacting, plus our big take report on the slump in diamonds causing a crisis at De Beers. But just a moment first on the latest announcement from Donald Trump, and this is to do with the Middle East.
Look, we wake up this morning in London to another shock announcement from the US president that the United States should take control of the devastated Gaza Strip and turn it into what the president has called a Riviera. So shunt the area's residents to other countries is the proposal. The reaction, as we've been describing, has been swift. The rebuke, the ridicule, kind of some level of incredulity amid this very tentative ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. Does President Trump's proposal upend the Middle East, or will the idea be stopped in its tracks? I think it's an absolutely open question. If you look at the Panama Canal and with Greenland, the comments from the president, the US bully pulpit, the power of that is so enormous that it has changed conversations in those two instances, you have to say. Panama is considering cancelling its contract with Hong Kong's Hutchison ports. Now, they operate 2 out of the 5 ports on the Panama Canal route. And Greenland, they've just announced that they're going to be holding their election in the coming few weeks in March. And already the Danish Prime Minister says that Denmark is ready to allow the US to boost its military presence in Greenland. So it has shifted conversations in those two spheres. But the Middle East?
Yeah, indeed. And look, we heard some of the reaction from former NATO official Wesley Clark there a moment ago as well, talking about the simple impracticalities of this plan as well. It's worth saying that our reporting tells us that only a handful of people were aware of this proposal ahead of Donald Trump making it public in that press conference with Benjamin Netanyahu. We talked about some of the reaction from the region. Not good so far, but a story to watch as it develops throughout the day. Let's go back, though, to the trade issues and the opening volleys in the US-China trade war. A call between President Trump and Xi has not yet taken place. Trump saying there's no rush to speak to the Chinese leader. Let's bring in Jenny Marsh, who leads our team covering the Chinese economy. Jenny, talk us through where things are now. We're about 24 hours on from the imposition of those extra tariffs on Chinese goods. We had the response from China yesterday as well. Is there any sign that perhaps a compromise could be reached here?
I think, we're now in kind of a bit of a holding pattern. And the next thing that we're sort of looking out for is that phone call, I think, between President Xi and Trump. Trump earlier in the week had sort of been touting that it was imminent, going to happen in the next sort of 24 hours on Tuesday. Then overnight, he's walked that back. So, reading the tea leaves, it looks like Xi is in sort of no hurry to have a phone call with Trump just yet. And that's really sort of the best opportunity for any kind of deal to take place. So we're just looking for signs of that. I think with the Chinese tariffs that were imposed in retaliation yesterday, the deadline for them coming into effect now is February 10th. So Trump had his own deadline of February 4th for his tariffs, and Xi didn't speak to Trump before that. I guess now the question is Trump going to get on the phone to Xi before the Chinese deadline expires and try to strike some kind of deal?
The analysis of China's steps, though, is that it's been quite cautious so far. How much pressure is Xi Jinping under domestically from the economy to avoid a trade war?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. And I think that's one of the key differences between this trade war and the last trade war is that Xi enters this one in a much more sort of precarious position economically. And so he's got to do what he can to protect the domestic economy. And you could really see that with the way that they hit back yesterday. They didn't go for sort of a blanket 10% back at the US as they would have done and did do in the first trade war. It was much, much more targeted. So hitting things like oil, which China doesn't really buy much of from the US. So making sure there was no real blowback on the economy, which is struggling with deflation, with this ongoing property crisis. So, Xi has sort of less room to maneuver than last time, and he has to be a bit more careful. And that, economists are sort of saying is actually more likely the way that he'll respond to the trade war is at home with stimulus. So you'll see sort of this tug of war almost between trying to do these measured responses to the US that don't hurt the Chinese economy and then dishing out sort of stimulus at home to compensate for whatever it is that Trump is throwing their way.
OK. Bloomberg's Jenny Marsh, thank you very much for bringing us up to date on that story.
Now to something different. Once the titan of the diamond industry, it created the slogan, "A diamond is forever." But De Beers is floundering. The market for natural stones has seen a prolonged crash, and De Beers' select group of buyers have become frustrated with the one-time monopoly. Joining us now is our managing editor for energy and commodities, Liesl Hill, who's been writing about this. Good morning, Liesl. Look, how big is the slump in rough diamond prices? How has De Beers handled this crisis?
Yep, morning. That's a complicated question on this slump. It's a really interesting and quite opaque market. There's literally thousands of different categories of rough diamonds of different sizes and qualities. But overall, our reporting suggests that rough diamond prices have dropped by roughly half over the past 2 years, which really is quite a dramatic slump. That 50% is the wholesale market, which is where different players sort of trade diamonds amongst each other. But the way that De Beers diamonds get into that market is through these 10 sales that they hold every year in the capital of Botswana. And so the way that De Beers has tried to handle it is they've tried to keep a floor under prices to avoid contributing even more to the collapse. So it's been reducing its own production. It's been trying to keep its prices up and putting lots of money into marketing for its diamonds. But even so, by November, its prices were about 25% higher than the going rate when its buyers arrived for the sale. So they've been growing increasingly frustrated because obviously that means that they'll be taking big losses on the diamonds that they're buying from De Beers. The company eventually capitulated. In December, it reduced prices by about 10 to 15%, but even so, its prices were still much more expensive than the rest of the market. And it's also just sort of adding to the frustration with its buyers. It's sent out notifications that it plans to sharply reduce the number of its accredited customers. So, as I said, its customers have been getting increasingly frustrated by all of this. They've been buying fewer diamonds and growing numbers have stopped showing up at the sales tool.
How important is China to all of this as well? It had been a diamond buying behemoth, and what role does it have today?
That's right. So China has typically been the world's second largest diamond market after the US, so it's hugely important. But demand has fallen sharply since the pandemic, in part because of macroeconomic uncertainty, leading to weakness broadly in luxury spending. If you don't know what next year's going to look like, you might not splash out on that diamond ring. But there's also this broader trend that we're seeing both in China and globally, which is this explosion in production and popularity of lab-grown diamonds. They're dramatically cheaper. Consumers who don't want to pay that much can still get flawless stones, where before that wouldn't have been the case. And so we're seeing lab-growns replacing a lot of the smaller, cheaper diamonds in jewelry being bought around the world, which has really been quite a fundamental change in the market. And then just coming back to China, just for a sense of how significant it is, diamond demand there, we think, is roughly half of what it was before the pandemic. So that just gives a sense of the scale.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.